The ink wasn't even dry on the divorce papers when Marcus Sterling flashed that winning smile. He thought he had pulled off the perfect crime, dumping the boring wife who supported him when he was nothing, to replace her with a younger model the second his company hit the Fortune 500. He walked out of that courtroom thinking Clara was worthless, leaving her with nothing but her late father's run-down shack. But Marcus forgot one crucial detail. Clara's father wasn't just a poor gardener. He was a man with a secret buried in a will that would turn Marcus's victory into a nightmare within 48 hours. Watch until the end, because the revenge in this story is the definition of poetic justice. The air conditioning in the conference room of Latham & Watkins in downtown Chicago was set to a freezing 65 degrees, but Clara felt like she was burning up. Across the mahogany table sat Marcus Sterling, the man she had loved for 12 years, the man she had worked 2 jobs to support while he built his tech empire, Sterlo Dynamics. He wasn't looking at her. He was checking his platinum Rolex, tapping his fingers impatiently against the polished wood. "Clara, we don't have all day," Marcus said, his voice smooth but laced with that new arrogance he had developed over the last 2 years. "My driver is waiting. Just sign the papers. It's exactly what we agreed on. You get the Honda, your personal items, and the emotional freedom you've been crying about." Clara's hand trembled as she held the Mont Blanc pen. Beside her, her lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Sarah Jenkins, looked tired. "Mrs. Sterling, I still advise against this. You are entitled to a share of the company. You were there at the incorporation." Waving alimony entirely as, "I just want out, Sarah," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "I just want him out of my life." Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. "See? She's being sensible for once. Listen, Sarah. Clara knows she didn't contribute to the business. She made sandwiches. She didn't write code. She didn't close deals in Tokyo or London. She was a domestic comfort. And now our paths have diverged." He leaned forward, his expensive cologne, a scent Clara used to buy him for Christmas, now replaced by something musky and unfamiliar, wafting across the table. "Sign it, Clara. Don't make this ugly. You know you can't afford a prolonged legal battle. I'll bury you in paperwork until you're living in your car. Or, you signed this, walk away with your dignity, and go live in that rotting shack your father left you." The mention of her father, Henry Caldwell, stung worse than the divorce. Henry had died 3 weeks ago. A heart attack. He had been a quiet, simple man who loved gardening and old books. Marcus had refused to even pay for the funeral, claiming his assets were tied up in a merger, forcing Clara to drain her small savings account to bury him. "Don't speak about my father," Clara said, her voice gaining a sudden steeliness. "He was a gardener, Clara." "A hermit," Marcus scoffed, adjusting his silk tie. "He died with $40 in his bank account. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You're destined for mediocrity. I'm just accelerating the process." Clara looked at the papers. Dissolution of marriage, waiver of assets. She thought about the late nights she spent folding flyers for his first startup. She thought about the loan she took out in her name to buy his first server. She looked at his face, handsome, chiseled, and utterly devoid of humanity. She realized then that fighting him would require energy she didn't have. She was grieving. She was broken. She just wanted the noise to stop. She pressed the pen to the paper. Clara Caldwell. She dropped the Sterling immediately. "Done," she whispered. Marcus snatched the papers before the ink could dry. He handed them to his high-priced attorney, Arthur Pendleton, who smirked. "Excellent," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "The house keys, Clara." I have until the weekend to move out. according to the agreement, Clara stammered. Actually, Arthur Pendleton interjected, sliding a secondary document forward. Clause 4B states that upon signature, the marital residence is vacated immediately to prevent damage to property. You have 24 hours to retrieve personal effects. Security will be present. Clara felt the room spin. 24 hours? But where will I go? Marcus was already at the door, typing a text message on his phone, a smile playing on his lips that had nothing to do with business. Go to your daddy's shack in the woods, Clara. Marcus threw over his shoulder without looking back. It fits you. And hey, try not to starve. He slammed the heavy glass door. Clara sat alone in the freezing room, the silence deafening. She was 34 years old, divorced, homeless, and penniless. But as she stared at the empty chair Marcus had occupied, she didn't know that the text message he had just sent was to a woman named Jessica, confirming that the pest was gone. And she certainly didn't know that miles away, in a dusty law office in Vermont, a different kind of document was being stamped, one that concerned the poor gardener, Henry Caldwell. The drive to the Sterling estate in Lake Forest was a blur of tears and rain. Clara drove her 2018 Honda Civic, the only thing she truly owned, up the winding driveway lined with the oak trees she had planted herself 5 years ago. When she pulled up to the mansion, a sprawling, modern glass and steel structure that had been featured in Architectural Digest, her stomach dropped. There was a moving truck in the driveway, a luxury moving truck, and there was a red Porsche 911 parked right where her Honda usually went. Clara turned off the ignition and stepped out into the drizzle. Before she could even reach the front steps, the heavy oak double doors swung open. It wasn't Marcus. It was a woman. She looked to be about 24. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater that Clara recognized. It was from a boutique in Paris Marcus had visited last month for business. She had blonde hair falling in perfect waves, and she was holding a glass of champagne. This was Jessica Vane. Clara knew the name. She was the new marketing intern Marcus had hired 6 months ago, the one he said was bright and full of potential. "Oh," Jessica said, feigning surprise. She took a sip of the champagne. "You must be the ex-wife. Marcus said you'd be coming by to pick up your junk." Clara felt a physical blow to her chest. "This is my house until tomorrow morning, Jessica. What are you doing here?" Jessica laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "Honey, didn't you read the papers? Marcus transferred the deed to a holding company last week. And guess who manages the residential assets of that company? Me. I'm moving in. Today." Jessica stepped aside, gesturing grandly to the foyer. "Be quick. I have decorators coming at 4 p.m. to get rid of this." She gestured vaguely at the warm, rustic furniture Clara had picked out. This depressing beige vibe. We're going modern, minimalist. Clara walked past her, her legs feeling like lead. She went up the floating staircase to the master bedroom. It smelled like bleach and Jessica's overly sweet perfume. Her clothes, her modest blazers, her jeans, her comfortable sweaters were already piled on the floor in black trash bags. "I had the maid pack for you," Jessica called out from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe. "To save time, we threw out the things that were, well, frankly, embarrassing. Who wears polyester blends in 2024? Clara knelt by the bags. She unzipped one. Her wedding album was in there, the cover bent. A framed photo of her and her father was face down, the glass cracked. She stood up, clutching the photo. "You can have him, Jessica," Clara said, her voice shaking but louder than before. "You can have the house. You can have the money. But you should know something about Marcus." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh, save it. You're bitter. He told me you were suffocating him. He will trade you in, Clara said, turning to face the younger woman. The moment you aren't shiny and new, the moment you need something from him, he will discard you. He doesn't love people, Jessica. He loves ownership. Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. Get your bags and get out. Marcus is coming home for a celebratory dinner tonight, and I don't want your sad energy ruining the Wagyu steaks. Clara dragged the 4 black trash bags down the stairs, one by one. Jessica watched from the landing, sipping her drink, not lifting a finger. When Clara finally loaded the trunk of her Honda, she was soaked from the rain and sweating from exertion. She looked back at the house one last time. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling window, she saw Marcus's car pull up. He got out, and Jessica ran to him. He spun her around, kissing her deeply, the kind of kiss he hadn't given Clara in 5 years. Marcus looked up and saw Clara standing by her old car. He didn't wave. He didn't look sad. He just checked his watch, pointed to the gate, and shooed her away like a stray dog. Clara got into the car, locked the doors, and screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw. Then she put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. She had nowhere to go but north, to Vermont, to the shack. She drove for 6 hours straight, leaving the city lights behind, driving deeper into the darkness of the mountains. She thought she had hit rock bottom. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. The storm was just beginning, but not the kind Marcus prepared for. As she crossed the state line, her phone buzzed. It was an email from an unknown address, trustycaldwellholdings.net. The subject line read, "Urgent, regarding the estate of Henry Caldwell." Clara ignored it. She assumed it was a bill collector's for her father's medical expenses. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on the muddy road ahead, leading her toward a destiny she couldn't possibly imagine. It was 2 a.m. when Clara's headlights cut through the dense pine forest of rural Vermont. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, but she remembered the way. She and her father used to come here when she was a little girl, before her mother died, before life got complicated. The property was located at the end of a long, unpaved gravel road that threatened to swallow the Honda's tires. Finally, the structure came into view. Marcus had called it a shack, and he wasn't entirely wrong. It was a small, A-frame cabin built in the 1970s. The wood was grey and weathered. The roof was covered in moss. There was no garage, just a lean-to shed filled with rusted gardening tools. Clara parked and killed the engine. The silence of the woods was heavy, broken only by the sound of wind rushing through the pines. It was pitch black. She used her phone's flashlight to find the key under the loose stone by the porch steps, a habit her father never broke. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed like a ghost. Inside, the air was stale and cold. It smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and damp wool. The smell of her father. Clara found the fuse box and flipped the main switch. Nothing happened. The power had been cut. "Of course," she sobbed, sliding down the wall until she hit the floor. Of course he couldn't pay the bill. She wrapped herself in her coat and curled up on the dusty rug in the center of the living room. She didn't have the energy to bring in her bags. She just lay there in the dark, crying until she fell into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. She woke up to the sound of pounding. Bang, bang, bang. Clara jolted awake. Sunlight was streaming through the dirty windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She checked her phone. 8:30 a.m., bang, bang. Someone was at the door. Clara stood up, smoothing her wrinkled clothes. Panic set in. Had Marcus sent someone to harass her here? Had the bank come to foreclose on the cabin? She opened the door tentatively. Standing on the porch was a man in a sharp, charcoal-grey three-piece suit that looked ridiculously out of place in the muddy forest. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair combed back severely and wire-rimmed glasses. Behind him, parked next to her dirty Honda, was a pristine black Bentley with a driver waiting by the door. "Ms. Clara Caldwell?" the man asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, and British. Yes, I'm Clara," she said, confused. "Who are you?" The man bowed slightly. "My name is Archibald Thorne. I am the senior executor for the firm Thorne, Sterling and Associates. No relation to your ex-husband, I assure you. I have been trying to reach you for 3 weeks." Clara rubbed her eyes. "I'm sorry, I've been going through a divorce. My father. He didn't have any money. If this is about unpaid bills, I don't have anything right now." Archibald Thorne smiled, but it wasn't a cruel smile like Marcus's. It was a smile of amusement, a smile that said he knew something the rest of the world didn't. "My dear Miss Caldwell," Thorne said, stepping past her into the dusty cabin without asking, looking around at the peeling wallpaper with a strange fondness. "I am not here to collect a debt. I am here to activate the protocol." "The protocol?" Clara asked, leaving the door open. "What are you talking about?" Thorne placed a leather briefcase on the rickety wooden dining table. He snapped the golden latches open. "Your father, Henry, was a man of extreme privacy. He believed that character is forged in the fire of struggle. He watched you closely these last 10 years, Clara. He watched you support a man who didn't appreciate you. He watched you work humble jobs with dignity." Thorne pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. "He also watched Marcus Sterling," Thorne added, his eyes narrowing. He knew this day would come. The divorce. The betrayal. Henry predicted it down to the month. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "My father was a gardener. He mowed lawns for the city council." Thorne chuckled softly. Henry liked gardening. It was his hobby, but it was not his profession. "Did you never wonder why your father, a gardener, made you study corporate law for 2 years before you dropped out to help Marcus? Did you never wonder how he paid for your mother's experimental cancer treatments in cash?" Clara was stunned. She had wondered, but she always assumed he had borrowed it or sold family heirlooms. "Who was my father?" Clara whispered. Thorne opened the document. Henry Caldwell was the majority shareholder and silent founder of Titanium Earth Holdings. He owned the mineral rights to 40% of the erratic earth metals used in smartphone production in North America. He also owned the land underneath the new tech district in Chicago. Clara's mouth fell open. The tech district? "Specifically," Thorne said, pointing a manicured finger at a map in the file. "The land upon which the Sterlo Dynamics headquarters is currently built. Marcus Sterling pays rent. He just doesn't know who the landlord is." Thorne looked up at Clara, his eyes twinkling. "The lease on Marcus's headquarters expires in 4 days, and according to your father's last will and testament, the ownership of the land and the decision to renew that lease now belongs solely to you." Clara grabbed the table to steady herself. "But there is a condition," Thorne said, his voice turning serious. "A condition? Yes. Your father wanted to ensure you were ready. The assets are yours, valued at approximately $850 million, providing you agree to one thing." Thorne slid a single sheet of paper forward. "You must personally deliver the eviction notice or the lease renewal to the tenant. You must look him in the eye when you do it." Clara stared at the paper. Yesterday, she was a discarded wife with a Honda Civic and a broken heart. Today, She was the woman who owned the ground Marcus Sterling walked on. Slowly, a smile spread across Clara's face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of reckoning. "Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her voice steady. "Do you have a pen?" Clara spent the next 4 hours in a state of suspended reality. Archibald Thorne was not merely a lawyer. He was a machine of efficiency. Within 30 minutes of Clara accepting the terms of her father's will, the cabin was swarming with activity. A satellite truck arrived to boost the internet signal. 2 junior associates from Thorne, Sterling and Associates appeared in a Range Rover with boxes of files and a catered lunch from a bistro in Burlington. "We have a lot of work to do, Ms. Caldwell," Thorne said, laying out a timeline on the rustic kitchen table. "The lease for the Sterlo Dynamics headquarters at 400 River North expires on Friday at midnight. That is exactly 72 hours from now. Marcus Sterling has been attempting to purchase the land from your father's shell company, Terra Firma LLC, for 5 years. He believes he is close to a deal with an anonymous elderly recluse." "He thought my father was just a stubborn old man," Clara murmured, reading the emails printed in the file. "Precisely. Marcus needs this land. He is currently in final negotiations to merge with Omnicorp, a Japanese tech giant. The merger is valued at $4 billion. However," Thorne tapped the paper with his pen, "a key clause in the merger agreement is secured infrastructure. If Marcus loses the lease on his headquarters, the merger collapses. His stock value will plummet to 0 overnight. He is over-leveraged, Clara. He spent millions on his lifestyle, assuming this deal would make him a billionaire." Clara looked at the numbers. Marcus was swimming in debt, hiding it behind rented Ferraris and leased penthouses, banking everything on this merger. And he needed her signature. Well, the signature of the landlord, to save his life. "He thinks I'm destitute," Clara said softly. "He told me to come here to starve." "Then let us ensure he remains ignorant until the moment of impact," Thorne said. "We need to get you back to Chicago. But not as Clara, the ex-wife. We need to introduce you as Clara, the chairman." Thorne made a phone call. An hour later, a helicopter landed in the clearing behind the cabin, blowing pine needles into a whirlwind. "Your father hated spending money on himself," Thorne shouted over the rotor noise as he guided Clara toward the aircraft. "But he authorized an unlimited budget for Project Justice. That is you, my dear." They flew directly to a private airfield outside Chicago, where a limousine was waiting. Clara was whisked to the penthouse suite at the Peninsula Hotel. Waiting inside the suite were 3 people: a stylist named Julian, a public relations crisis manager named Eleanor, and a forensic accountant named David. "We have 48 hours to erase the last 10 years of neglect," Julian said, looking Clara up and down critically but kindly. "Marcus Sterling liked you in beige and grey because he wanted you to disappear. We are going to make you visible. Painfully visible." For the next 2 days, Clara underwent a transformation that was more than skin deep. It wasn't just about the facials, the hair treatments that turned her dull brown locks into a rich, glossy chestnut, or the tailored suits that cost more than her old Honda. It was about the briefing sessions. David, the accountant, walked her through Marcus's books. Clara learned where he was hiding assets, which offshore accounts he was using to pay for Jessica's gifts, and exactly how desperate he was. "He's missed payroll twice in the last quarter," David revealed, pointing to a red column on the screen. "He covered it with personal loans. If this merger fails, he goes to prison for fraud. He's been cooking the books to look solvent for the Japanese investors." Clara felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. "He told me I was the financial drain. He told me my grocery bills were too high." "Projection," David said dryly. Classic narcissism. By Thursday evening, the night of the Sterlo Dynamics pre-merger gala, Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror in the suite. She was wearing a custom-made gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves and trailed off into a train that looked like liquid night. Her hair was swept up, revealing a diamond necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, something Thorne had retrieved from a bank vault. She didn't look like the woman who had cried in the lawyer's office. She looked like a queen who had just signed a death warrant. Thorne entered the room, dressed in a tuxedo. He paused, a look of genuine pride on his face. "Your father would have been terrified of you right now," he said gently. "The car is ready." "Does he know?" Clara asked. "Does Marcus know the landlord is coming?" "He knows that the chairman of Terra Firma LLC has finally agreed to meet him at the gala to sign the lease renewal in person." Thorne smiled. "He is expecting a 90-year-old man in a wheelchair. He has prepared a bottle of vintage scotch and a box of cigars to butter him up." Clara picked up the black leather portfolio containing the eviction notice. "I hate scotch," she said. "Shall we?" Thorne offered his arm. Clara took it. "Let's go say hello to my husband." The Sterlo Dynamics Gala was the event of the season. Held at the grand ballroom of the Palmer House, Hilton, it was a sea of black ties, sequined gowns, and fake smiles. Marcus Sterling stood at the center of the room, holding court. He looked impeccable in a Tom Ford tuxedo, one hand resting possessively on the waist of Jessica Vane. Jessica was wearing a shimmering gold dress that was a little too tight and a little too loud, but she beamed, soaking up the attention. "Yes, the merger is practically a done deal," Marcus was saying loudly to a group of investors. "We signed the papers Monday. The Japanese team is flying in tomorrow. And the real estate? A formality. The owner is an old family friend. He's coming tonight to bless the union, so to speak." "I heard the owner was difficult," one investor, a skeptical man named Mr. Sato, noted. "The land rights have always been a grey area in your portfolio." "Nonsense," Marcus waved his hand, taking a sip of his martini. "I have it under control. By midnight, I'll own the ground beneath the building. I'm unbreakable." Jessica giggled. "Marcus is a genius. He talks people into anything." Just then, the music in the ballroom shifted. The live jazz band quieted down. A hush rippled through the room, starting from the entrance and spreading like a wave toward the center. Marcus frowned. "What's going on? Is the Japanese delegation early?" He turned toward the massive double doors. Archibald Thorne entered first. His severe presence and the way he carried himself commanded instant respect. He stopped and turned, extending a hand to help someone else enter. Clara stepped into the light. The room went silent. For a moment, no one recognized her. They saw a stunning woman in midnight blue, radiating power and wealth. She walked with a confident, predatory grace, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. It wasn't until she was 20 feet away that Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered, splashing gin and olives onto his patent leather shoes, but he didn't notice. "Clara?" he whispered. Jessica squinted, her smile freezing. "Is that the sandwich maker?" Clara didn't stop. She walked straight up to the circle of investors, flanked by Thorne and two large security guards. She looked at Marcus, then at Jessica, and finally addressed Mr. Sato, the Japanese investor. "Mr. Sato," Clara said, her voice smooth and projecting perfectly without a microphone. "I apologize for the interruption. I believe you were discussing the stability of the infrastructure." Mr. Sato bowed slightly, entranced. "We were, madam." "Caldwell," Clara said. "Clara Caldwell. I am the chairman and majority shareholder of Terra Firma LLC." The colour drained from Marcus's face so fast he looked like a corpse. "What?" he choked out. "That's impossible. Terra Firma is owned by Henry Caldwell," Clara finished for him. "My father, who passed away 3 weeks ago. You remember him, Marcus? The gardener you wouldn't pay to bury." A murmur of shock went through the crowd. Phones were raised. The recording lights blinked on. "Clara, what is this?" Marcus hissed, stepping forward, his charm replaced by panic. "You're making a scene. You don't own anything. You signed the divorce papers. You waived your assets." "I waived my rights to your assets, Marcus," Clara corrected him, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "I didn't waive my rights to mine. And it turns out my father left me quite a bit, including the land your headquarters sits on." Jessica laughed nervously, looking around for support. "This is a joke, right? She's lying. She's crazy. Marcus, call security." "I wouldn't do that," Thorne interjected calmly. "Ms. Caldwell is the guest of honor. In fact, technically, since your company is 3 months behind on rent, according to the fine print of the original 1990 lease agreement, she is the only person with the legal right to be here. You are currently trespassing." Marcus was sweating now. He looked at Mr. Sato, who was frowning deeply. "Marcus," Mr. Sato said, his voice hard, "you told us you owned the land. You told us the lease was a formality." "It is. It is," Marcus stammered. He grabbed Clara's arm. "Clara, honey, listen. Let's go to the back room. We can talk about this. We're family, right? 12 years? Clara looked at his hand on her arm until he let go. "We aren't family, Marcus. You made sure of that on Tuesday at 11:00 a.m. "Look, I'm sorry about what I said," Marcus whispered, desperate, his eyes darting around the room. "I was stressed. The merger, the pressure. I still love you. Jessica meant nothing. She's an employee," Jessica gasped. "Marcus!" Clara laughed. It was a genuine laugh, bright and terrifying. "Oh, Marcus, you never change. Selling out the new model to try and get the old one back because the old one suddenly has a price tag." She signaled to Thorne, who handed her the black leather portfolio. "I came here tonight to handle the lease, Marcus, as requested." Marcus let out a breath of relief. He straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. "Right, good. See, everyone, it's just business, a negotiation. Clara, you're smart. You know that without this building, the rent stops coming in. You need me." "That's the thing about being a Caldwell, Marcus," Clara said, opening the portfolio. "We don't need much. My dad lived in a shack. I drive a Honda. I don't need your rent money." She pulled out a single document. It wasn't a renewal. It was printed on thick red legal paper. "This is a notice of eviction," Clara announced, her voice ringing through the ballroom. "Pursuant to Clause 17 of the original land deed, I am invoking the character clause. The landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease immediately if the tenant engages in fraudulent financial activity or moral turpitude." "Fraud?" Marcus screamed. "I haven't committed fraud. We have the ledgers, Marcus," Clara said, holding up a USB drive. "My forensic team has been busy. You've been inflating revenue numbers by funneling personal loans through shell companies. It's a Ponzi scheme. And Mr. Sato, I think you should check the collateral he offered you. It's my land, which he doesn't own." Mr. Sato signaled his team. They immediately began typing on their phones, backing away from Marcus. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Marcus," Clara said, handing him the red paper. "The locks will be changed on Saturday morning. Security is already on site." Marcus stared at the paper. His hands were shaking. You can't do this. This is my life. I built this." "You built it on my back," Clara said, leaning in close so only he could hear. and you built it on my father's land. Now, I'm taking it back." Marcus looked at Jessica, but she was already backing away, vanishing into the crowd. He looked at the investors, but they were turning their backs. He was alone in the center of the ballroom, holding an eviction notice. Clara turned to leave. "Wait!" Marcus shouted, tears streaming down his face, fully breaking down. "Clara, please! I'll give you half. I'll give you everything. Just don't destroy me." Clara paused. She looked back over her shoulder, the diamonds at her neck catching the light. "You said I was destined for mediocrity, Marcus," she said. "I'm just accelerating your process." She walked out of the ballroom, leaving silence in her wake. But the night wasn't over. As Clara stepped into the cool night air where the limo waited, Thorne's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went pale. He covered the phone. "Clara, don't get in the car." "Why?" Clara asked, her adrenaline fading into confusion. "That was my contact at the precinct," Thorne said. "Marcus didn't just cook the books. He borrowed money from the wrong people to cover his tracks, the Chicago outfit. And they just found out the merger is dead." Clara looked back at the hotel entrance. A black van screeched to a halt in front of the valet. 4 men in heavy coats jumped out and ran inside. "He's going to get hurt," Clara whispered. "He made his bed," Thorne said. "No," Clara said, her eyes hardening. "He goes to prison. He doesn't get the easy way out. I want him to live long enough to see me run his company better than he ever did." Clara grabbed her phone. "Call the police, Thorne. Save him. For now." The chaos outside the Palmer house, Hilton, was a symphony of sirens. Clara stood behind the tinted glass of the limousine, watching the scene unfold like a dark movie. Thanks to Thorne's call, 6 Chicago PD cruisers had swarmed the entrance, just as the men in the black van were dragging a kicking and screaming Marcus toward their vehicle. The collectors scattered the moment the blue lights flashed, abandoning their prize. Marcus wasn't kidnapped, but he wasn't free either. Clara watched as officers handcuffed her ex-husband. He looked disheveled, his tuxedo torn at the shoulder, his face streaked with sweat and tears. He was shouting something about being a CEO, about having rights, but the officers were pushing him into the back of a squad car. He was being arrested for wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud, charges that carried a combined sentence of 20 to 30 years. "He is safe from the mob," Thorne said quietly from the seat beside her. "In federal custody, the outfit can't touch him." "You saved his life, Clara." "I didn't do it for him," Clara replied, turning away from the window as the squad car sped away. "I did it because I want him to remember. Every day he sits in a cell, I want him to remember that he's alive because of the woman he called worthless." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind that reshaped the Chicago tech landscape. With Marcus in jail and the fraud exposed, Sterlo Dynamics stock crashed. It went from trading at $140 a share to $2.30 in 48 hours. The merger with Omnicorp was dead. The employees were terrified. The board of directors was in a panic. They had no CEO. They had no money. And worst of all, they had no building. Their eviction date had passed, and Clara held the keys. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the board of directors of Sterlo Dynamics requested an emergency meeting with the landlord. They expected to meet at a law office. Instead, Clara made them come to the building they used to occupy, the one she had locked them out of. They sat in the dark boardroom. The power had been cut, just as the power had been cut at her father's shack. 12 wealthy men and women sat in their expensive suits, shivering slightly in the unheated room. When Clara entered, she was flanked by Archibald Thorne and a team of auditors. She didn't sit down. She paced at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara began, her voice echoing in the cold room. "You are trespassing, but I'm willing to listen. Mrs. Sterling, Ms. Caldwell," the chairman of the board, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, stammered. "We are facing bankruptcy. If we don't get access to the servers in the basement, the company dies. Thousands of jobs will be lost. We are begging you to renew the lease." "The lease is non-negotiable," Clara said sharply. "I don't rent to criminals. And under your watch, Marcus turned this company into a criminal enterprise." "We didn't know," a board member protested. "It was your job to know," Clara snapped. "But I care about the engineers. I care about the receptionists. I care about the people who actually work, unlike you." She signaled Thorne, who slid a thick stack of binders onto the table. "I am proposing a solution," Clara said. "I will not renew the lease for Sterlo Dynamics. However, my holding company, Terra Firma, is willing to acquire the assets of your failed company. We will buy the servers, the intellectual property, and the contracts." "Acquire us?" Henderson scoffed. "For how much? The valuation was $4 billion last week." "That was last week," Clara said coldly. "Today you have $400 million in debt and no headquarters. I am offering to buy the company for $1. $1? The room erupted in outrage. "Plus," Clara raised her voice, silencing them, "I will assume the debt. I will pay the back wages of every employee you haven't paid in 2 months, and I will keep the staff. But the board? You are all fired. Effective immediately. No severance packages. No golden parachutes." "You can't do that," Henderson shouted. "We'll sue." "Sue who?" Thorne stepped in, his voice like gravel. "The company is insolvent. You can accept the dollar and walk away without liability, or you can face the shareholder lawsuits that are coming next week on your own. Ms. Caldwell is offering you a lifeboat. I suggest you take it." The room fell silent. They looked at the shivering board members. They looked at the red ink on the ledgers. One by one they signed. As they filed out of the room, defeated, Clara walked to the window. She looked down at the city. She had done it. She hadn't just taken the house. She had taken the kingdom. "What about Jessica?" Clara asked, without turning around. "Miss Vane," Thorne said with a dry chuckle. She attempted to sell her story to a tabloid, The Secret Life of the Billionaire's Mistress. Unfortunately, since she signed a non-disclosure agreement when Marcus hired her, our legal team blocked the publication. She was last seen moving back in with her parents in Ohio. She is currently managing a spray-tan salon. Clara nodded. "Good. Let her fade away." "And the company?" Thorne asked. "What shall we call it? Sterlo Dynamics is a tainted name." Clara thought about her father. She thought about the hours he spent in the garden, nurturing things that took time to grow, things that were real and lasting. "Call it Roots," Clara said. "Roots technology. Because we're going to build this the right way, from the ground up." 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. The Chicago winter had melted away, replaced by a tentative blossoming spring. The Metropolitan Correctional Center was a gray, towering monolith in the center of the city, a stark contrast to the glass and steel skyscrapers that surrounded it. Inside, the air was recycled and smelled faintly of industrial antiseptic and floor wax. It was a place where time didn't flow. It dripped. Clara sat in the private visiting booth on the 12th floor. She was no longer the woman who wore oversized sweaters to hide herself, nor was she the avenging angel in the midnight blue gown. Today, she wore a tailored cream-colored suit, simple gold earrings, and her hair loose. She looked like a woman who was comfortable in her own skin. She checked her watch, a simple Cartier tank watch she had bought for herself. It was 2:00 p.m. The heavy steel door on the other side of the reinforced glass buzzed loudly. A guard stepped in, followed by a man shuffling in shackled feet. It took Clara a moment to truly recognize him. Marcus Sterling had always been a man of vanity. He spent thousands on facials, hair plugs, and personal trainers, but the man sitting down on the metal stool opposite her looked 20 years older. His skin was sallow and grey, deprived of sunlight. His once thick hair was thinning rapidly, revealing a scalp pale from lack of exposure. The orange jumpsuit hung off his frame, suggesting he had lost at least 30 pounds. He didn't look up at first. He kept his eyes on the scratched metal counter. "Hello, Marcus," Clara said softly. Her voice was carried through the electronic grate at the bottom of the glass. Marcus flinched. He slowly raised his head. His eyes, usually bright with calculation and arrogance, were dull and bloodshot. When he saw her, a flicker of something, shame perhaps or regret, crossed his face. "You actually came," he rasped. His voice was rough, unused. "I thought my lawyer was lying." "He said you wouldn't stop filing requests," Clara said, clasping her hands on the table. "He said you were becoming disruptive." "I just needed to know," Marcus whispered, leaning forward as much as the chain connected to the table would allow. "I needed to know if it was real. In here, you lose track of what's real." "It's real, Marcus." "The company?" he asked, a desperate hunger in his eyes. Does it still exist?" Clara nodded. "It does. But it's not Sterlo Dynamics anymore. It's Roots Technology." Marcus winced at the name. "Roots? Because of your father?" "Because of the foundation," Clara corrected. "We had a lot of work to do. The forensic audit took 3 months. You left a mess, Marcus. There were phantom employees, inflated contracts, the Ponzi scheme with the investors. It was rotting from the inside out." "I was fixing it," Marcus snapped, a flash of his old defensiveness appearing. "I just needed more time. The merger would have covered the holes." "The merger was a bandage on a gunshot wound," Clara said calmly. "We stripped it down. We sold the private jet. We sold the corporate apartments in London and Tokyo. We liquidated the fleet of luxury cars." Marcus looked pained. "My Porsche?" "Sold. The proceeds went to the employee pension fund you raided," Clara said. "We're profitable now, Marcus. Actually profitable. Not just on paper. Forbes ran a piece on us last week. They called it the turnaround of the decade." Marcus slumped back. "And you? Are you the CEO?" "I am the chairwoman," Clara said. "I hired a CEO, a woman named Elena, who used to run operations for Google. She knows how to manage people, not just manipulate them. I focus on the vision and the philanthropy." Silence stretched between them. The buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. "What about Jessica?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Does she ask about me?" Clara sighed. She had expected this. "Marcus, Jessica didn't even stay for your arraignment. The moment the handcuffs went on, she called an Uber." "She loved me," Marcus insisted weakly. "She loved the lifestyle," Clara said. "We found out she tried to sell a tell-all book about your private life to a tabloid. Our lawyers blocked it. She's back in Ohio now, living with her parents. She's working at a tanning salon." Marcus closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out, tracking through the grime on his cheek. The reality of his isolation was finally hitting him. The friends, the lovers, the sycophants. They were all gone. "I have nothing," he whispered. "I'm looking at 15 years, Clara. Maybe 20. I'll be an old man when I get out. If I get out." "You have time," Clara said. "Time to think. That's more than you gave my father when you refused to help him." Marcus looked at her, his expression crumbling. "I'm sorry. I know. I know words don't mean anything now. But I am. I was so afraid of being poor, Clara. I was so afraid of being like my parents that I became a monster. And now, I'm worse than poor. I'm a number." He looked at her through the glass, his hand pressing against it. "Why are you here, Clara? To laugh? To show me the suit? To tell me you won?" Clara reached into her leather bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed parchment. "I found this in my father's safety deposit box," she said. "It was wrapped around the deed to the land." She unfolded it and held it up to the glass so he could read the shaky handwriting of Henry Caldwell. "To my daughter. Justice is a hammer, and sometimes it must be swung. But do not let the hammer become your hand. A life lived in anger is a cage just as small as a prison cell. Win the war, my love, but then put down the sword. Plant a garden." Clara folded the letter back up. "I didn't come here to gloat, Marcus," she said softly. "I came here to let you go." "Let me go." "I've been carrying you around for 12 years, Clara said. "First as the husband I tried to please, then as the tyrant I feared, and finally as the enemy I wanted to destroy. But if I keep hating you, if I keep enjoying your misery, then I'm still trapped in this marriage. I'm still defined by you." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I forgive you, Marcus." Marcus stared at her, stunned. "You? After everything?" "I forgive you," she repeated. "Not for you. For me. Because I have a company to run. I have a life to live. And I can't do that if I'm dragging your ghost around with me." "Clara, wait!" Marcus pleaded, panic rising in his voice as he realized she was leaving. "Please just stay a few more minutes. I'm so lonely." "I deposited $5,000 into your commissary account," Clara said, ignoring his plea. "Buy some books, read. Learn something real. Goodbye, Marcus." She turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. "Clara!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "Clara!" The guard stepped forward, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder to restrain him. Clara didn't look back. The buzzer sounded, the door clicked open, and she stepped out of the visiting room. The transition was jarring. She walked from the dim, oppressive gray of the prison into the blinding afternoon sun of downtown Chicago. The air smelled of exhaust and hot pavement, but to Clara it smelled like oxygen. Archibald Thorne was waiting by the curb, leaning against the polished black Bentley. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, but he folded it neatly as he saw her approach. He studied her face carefully. "Did you get what you needed?" Thorne asked. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs. She looked up at the sky, watching a cloud drift past the sun. She felt lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Yes," Clara said, "it's done." "He begged?" "He did." "And you?" "I walked away." Clara smiled. "He's the past, Archibald. Roots is the future." Thorne opened the rear door for her. "I took the liberty of ordering some new equipment for the weekend. The hydrangeas at the Vermont cabin need pruning. And I believe the forecast calls for rain." Clara laughed, a genuine free sound that startled a few pedestrians. "Perfect," she said, sliding into the car. "I love the rain. It makes everything grow." As the Bentley pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city she now owned a piece of, Clara didn't look in the rearview mirror at the prison fading into the distance. She looked forward, through the windshield, at the endless open road ahead. Wow. I don't think Marcus ever saw that coming. It just goes to show that you should never underestimate someone just because they're quiet or kind. Clara went from a discarded wife to a CEO in the span of a week, and she did it with class. What did you think of the $1 buyout scene? Would you have forgiven Marcus in the end, or would you have let him rot without a penny? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate revenge and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.